Jerusalem, 1119 A.D., the holiest city in the medieval world. Thousands of Christian pilgrims were making the dangerous journey from Europe to pray at its holy sites. And someone was robbing them, killing them, leaving their bodies in the dust. 9 knights decided to do something about it. What began as a small private security force for pilgrims became the most powerful military organization in medieval history. They were monks who fought wars, warriors who prayed 5 times a day, bankers who financed entire kingdoms. And their rank system was unlike anything else in the medieval world. Today, you're going to live every single rank of it. From a peasant boy who couldn't afford shoes, to a name that made popes and kings lose sleep. Before we rank up, you need to understand what made the Templars fundamentally different from every other military force of the era. They were not mercenaries. They were not a national army. They were a religious order that happened to be the most disciplined fighting force in the Holy Land. Founded in 1119 by Hugues de Payens, the Order of the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ, and of the Temple of Solomon, the Knights Templar, were officially blessed by the Pope himself in 1129. That papal blessing gave them something no other military force had. They answered to no king, no emperor, no local lord. Only the Pope. This made them simultaneously untouchable and deeply threatening to every secular ruler in Europe. At their peak, the Templars owned property in every Christian nation, operated the medieval world's first international banking system, and fielded an army that had fought in every major crusade. 10 ranks, 200 years of history, and an ending no one saw coming. Rank 1, Donatus, the servant brother. You are 14 years old. You have no money, no noble blood, and no military training. But you have something the Templars needed desperately: labor. Donati were lay associates, not full members of the order, but permanently attached to it. You donated yourself, in a sense, to the Templars' mission. Your work was unglamorous: mucking stables, hauling supplies, maintaining the commandery's farms and buildings, but you were learning. The daily rhythm of Templar life, 5 prayer sessions, strict meal schedules, constant discipline, was reshaping you whether you realized it or not. You watched the knights train, watched how they moved, how they held themselves, how they treated their horses, and you began to understand something that most people outside the order never grasped. The Templars were not just soldiers. They were a way of life. Rank 2, Frère Sergent, the sergeant brother. You've been accepted as a full member of the order, not a knight. Sergeants were drawn from non-noble families, but a real fighting brother with real responsibilities. The distinction between knight brothers and sergeant brothers was strictly enforced. Knights wore white mantles with the red cross. You wore black or brown. But on the battlefield, this distinction became almost meaningless. Sergeants fought alongside knights in every major engagement of the Crusades. Your training now began in earnest. Sword, lance, shield, and the devastating Templar cavalry charge that was feared across the Holy Land. The Templar charge was not reckless. It was a precisely coordinated mass of horsemen that hit enemy formations like a battering ram, effective precisely because it was controlled. You also began learning the Templar Rule, the 686 clauses that governed every aspect of your life, from how to saddle a horse to how to speak at the dinner table. The rule was not optional. Breaking it meant anything from losing your horse privileges to expulsion from the order, the worst punishment a Templar could face. Rank 3, Frère Chevalier, the knight brother. You were born noble. That was not a choice. It was a requirement. Only men of proven knightly birth could wear the white mantle. The ceremony of becoming a knight brother was one of the most solemn rituals in medieval Christendom. You spent the entire night before your induction in prayer, alone, in the dark, asking God if you were truly ready to give your life to this mission. At dawn, senior brothers examined your fitness, your knowledge of the rule, your commitment. Then, and only then, did the white mantle descend onto your shoulders. That white mantle meant you had given up everything: personal wealth, family ties, marriage, individual ambition. It also meant you now carried one of the most recognizable and feared symbols in the medieval world. On the battlefield, the white mantle served a psychological purpose as powerful as any weapon. Enemies knew that Templars did not retreat, did not negotiate, did not surrender. Rank 4, Chevalier de la Maison, the household knight. You've survived your first crusade campaign. You've seen men die for the Red Cross. You've killed for it. As a household knight, you were now assigned to a specific commandery as its permanent military garrison. These commanderies were scattered across every Christian country, from England to the Holy Land, each one a self-sufficient Templar fortress and economic engine. Your daily life was structured around the canonical hours: 7 prayer sessions, training periods, administrative duties, and then finally sleep. The Templar Rule was explicit. Idleness was a sin. Every moment not in prayer was in service. You also began participating in the order's banking operations, which would eventually become more powerful than the military itself. A pilgrim could deposit gold in London, receive a coded letter of credit, travel safely without carrying valuables, and withdraw equivalent gold in Jerusalem. In the 12th century, this was revolutionary. Rank 5. Commandeur, the Knight Commander. You now command a commandery, 40 to 200 brothers, depending on its size, all of them your direct responsibility. The commandery was not just a military base. It was a farm, a bank, a hospital, a church, and a training facility simultaneously. As commander, you managed the economics that funded the entire crusade mission. Without money, there were no ships, no horses, no weapons, no Holy Land. You also sat on the regional chapter, the governing council that made collective decisions for multiple commanderies in your area. Historical records show that Templar commanders were often consulted by local kings and nobles on matters of diplomacy, finance, and military strategy. The more successful your commandery, the more resources you sent to the Holy Land, and the more the grandmaster noticed your name. Rank 6, Draper, the draper. The title sounds less impressive than it is. The draper was responsible for the equipment, clothing, and supplies of the entire order. In an age before standardized manufacturing, ensuring 15,000 Templar brothers across the known world were properly equipped was a logistical achievement comparable to running a modern army. The draper also enforced one of the most important and visible aspects of Templar identity: uniformity. When 1,000 white mantles with red crosses charged in formation, the psychological impact required absolute visual uniformity. An irregular mantle could cost lives. The draper also managed the order's relationships with suppliers across Europe, wool merchants in England, metal workers in France, shipbuilders in Genoa and Venice. At this rank, you understood something most soldiers never grasped. Wars are won by logistics. The army that runs out of food, horseshoes, or boots first almost always loses. Rank 7. Marshal, the marshal. The marshal was the supreme military commander of the entire Templar order, responsible for every battle decision, every tactical formation, every military training standard across all of Christendom. Only the grandmaster outranked you in military matters. And even the grandmaster was expected to defer to the marshal's battlefield judgment. The great Templar marshals were household names across medieval Europe and the Holy Land, feared by Muslim commanders and respected by Crusader kings alike. At the Battle of Montgisar in 1177, a Templar marshal led fewer than 500 Templar knights in a charge that routed Saladin's army of 26,000, one of the most extraordinary military upsets of the medieval era. That victory was not luck. It was the result of absolute discipline, superior training, and the terrifying morale advantage of men who had genuinely made peace with dying. As marshal, you also managed the most controversial aspect of Templar military culture, the absolute prohibition against retreat without specific authorization. Rank 8, seneschal, the seneschal. The seneschal was the Grand Master's right hand, his deputy, the man who ran the order when the Grand Master was incapacitated, traveling, or in negotiations. At this rank, you understood the full complexity of what the Templars actually were. and it went far beyond the sword and the cross. The order controlled estates in England, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Germany, Cyprus, the Holy Land, and dozens of other territories. Managing this required a bureaucracy as sophisticated as any European kingdom, and the seneschal sat at the center of it. You also began navigating the most dangerous aspect of Templar power, the envy of secular rulers who resented an organization that answered to no one but the Pope. By this point in history, the Templars had accumulated enough wealth and power that several European kings were beginning to ask a dangerous question: what would happen if the order simply ceased to exist? Rank 9. Grandmaster, grandmaster. You lead the entire Knights Templar order. Every brother, every commandery, every bank, every ship, every battle. The grandmaster was elected for life by a complex process designed to prevent any single faction from controlling the outcome. Once elected, you answered to only one authority on earth, the Pope. And even that relationship required careful management. The most famous grandmasters, Hugues de Payens, Bernard de Tremolay, Gérard de Riedfort, Jacques de Molay, made decisions that changed the course of the Crusades. The last grandmaster, Jacques de Molay, faced a crisis that no military training could prepare him for. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, King Philip IV of France ordered the simultaneous arrest of every Templar in France. The charges were fabricated, the motives were financial. The result was catastrophic. Rank 10, Miles Christie, Soldier of Christ, the Legend. This rank doesn't exist in the formal Templar hierarchy. It's what history gave to those who defined the order, whose names became synonymous with the Templar mission itself. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, became perhaps the most legendary of all, not through victory, but through what he did at the end. After 7 years of imprisonment and torture, de Molay was brought before a public assembly to confess the fabricated crimes of the order. Instead, he recanted his forced confessions. He was burned at the stake that same evening. His last recorded words were a challenge to the king and pope who had destroyed his order, and both died within the year. The Templar order was officially dissolved in 1312, but the legend refused to die. For 700 years, the Knights Templar have inspired conspiracy theories, secret societies, novels, films, and genuine historical scholarship more than any other medieval organization. From a peasant boy who couldn't afford shoes standing at a commandery gate, to a name that kings tried to destroy and couldn't, that is the life of a Templar knight. The Templars weren't saints. They weren't perfect warriors of God unmarked by politics and greed. They were human beings inside an extraordinary institution, one that combined religious devotion, military discipline, and financial sophistication in a way the world had never seen and has never quite repeated. 10 ranks, 2 centuries, and an ending that is still debated by historians today. Next week on Shroudex, explain your life at every rank of the Spartan warrior. Subscribe so you don't miss it.